Peter Drucker said it best that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that is particularly with the types of people who work at startup companies or tech companies, so true.
Hi people, welcome to another episode of the Sustainability Circle podcast. I'm Max, co-founder of TSC, and I am again your host today. We bring you insights, success stories, and practical advice from top sustainability leaders driving sustainability in organizations worldwide. And today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jamieson Saab, Global Head of Sustainability at Wolt, a fast-growing tech company focused on quick commerce services. If you lived in a city somewhere in Europe, you've probably used Wolt or at least heard of it. He's been leading sustainability initiatives, making sure sustainability is not just a buzzword, but a real driver of impact and growth at Wolt. I've known Jamieson for quite a while right now, as he's also a founding member of the Sustainability Circle. And when we spoke in the past about his role, I was actually struck by how sustainability at Wolt operates in a very unique way, something Jamieson described provocatively as startup sustainability or sustainability without a strategy. A framing that I really liked because it resonated with my own experience working in scale-ups where things move so fast that traditional strategies often fall short. So today we'll explore together startup sustainability, a real-world approach to scaling impact at Wolt. Jamieson, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have you here.
So nice to be here, Max. Thanks for having me as well.
So as usual, we dive right into the episode and explore the topic about how you actually ended up in sustainability. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about your career path. I also know that you had many stations already, lived in different countries all over the world. So tell us a bit about your journey in sustainability and how you ended up at Wolt.
Sure, Max. Well, as you know, I'm originally from Canada. So I grew up in Toronto, right in the downtown core, actually, and did the standard thing that everyone else does, just go to university and get a business degree. And sustainability was something that was, at the time, just becoming interesting. And it was 2004, Al Gore had actually just written his book, An Inconvenient Truth. And the university that I was at offered its first program in something called CSR. And I thought, oh, that sounds cool. I initially thought I wanted to be an investment banker. I realized I'm not actually that good with numbers. So the option was to try something that was different. And during my studies, I also had a chance to live in Mexico and China. I got to do an exchange and see firsthand, coming from more of a developed country and living in a country where things were a little bit different, or two countries where things were a little bit different, the impact that big companies have, small companies, and the importance of actually putting things into context. And that, I think that's probably what cemented my desire to go into sustainability full time. Over the last 20 years, I've spent half of my career in North America working for large retailers like Home Depot or OfficeMax, helping them define and implement sustainability strategies that drive business growth, both on the consumer side and also on the B2B side. And in 2015, I had a chance actually to go to Copenhagen, Denmark, and become the head of sustainable procurement for an organization called UNOPS, which is it's United Nations Office for Project Services, but they essentially operate as a consulting firm for all the other UN agencies. So they don't work on technical programs, they work more on implementation. So a lot of procurement products, a lot of project management, infrastructure development. And I loved that job because I got a chance to work on many different sustainable development projects. I got to be involved in actually the development of sustainable development goals, particularly related to SDG 12, which is sustainable public procurement, and to help and advise big governments and large public institutions on how to spend money. And I've always prided myself on being a shopper at heart. I love shopping. I think most of us do. But I also think that I have turned my core competency of shopping into a career path in many ways with a sustainability twist. And today I find myself at Wolt. I'm the head of sustainability here. It's a very exciting and very big role because I think, as we'll talk about, scale ups and startups and generally just very entrepreneurial companies have to approach sustainability a little bit differently. But I work at Wolt because I love food and I love the potential for us to have a big impact on how people live their lives every day.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is going to be a very exciting episode because usually our guests here are working for more traditional corporates. And today we really have that fresh air here on the show. And we talk about startup culture. I mean, Wolt operates maybe with a startup culture, but as a scale up, it's actually a major player with thousands of employees and operations in many countries. So just as a disclaimer, maybe we talk about startups, but Wolt is actually already a proper corporate, maybe with a startup culture. So can you tell us a bit more about what that means in practice? So how many employees and how many countries do you operate? I can also imagine that you have a pretty big fleet of drivers delivering all of those food services. So give us a bit about an idea how Wolt operates and what that means in specific.
You bet, Mac. So Volt is a technology company, and I think that's an important place to start. We don't have a very big physical footprint if you look at it in the more traditional sense. We have offices in every country. We operate right now in 30 countries, and we have about 100,000 restaurant partners, about 250,000 couriers that are gig workers who work with us, not necessarily for us. And when I started at Volt about 3 years ago, we had 2,300 people working in the office. And today that number is much closer to 13,000. So in just 3 years, you can imagine the scale and the speed at which we've grown, which has been kind of like hold on to your hats and your seats because we're on a rocket ship to the moon. But our core products that we offer to customers, essentially our mission statement is to deliver joy and earning opportunities to the cities where we work. Core products are supporting small restaurants and retailers in local cities to be able to grow their business through access to 42 million registered users that we have using our app almost every day. We provide convenience and lots of variety in terms of the products that we offer. But it's the, I don't want to say pizza delivery model because it's not, but it's essentially if you want something, you can have it delivered in 30 minutes or less. Volt, through our technology platforms, enable the restaurants, the merchants, retailers, and consumers to connect with courier partners that will deliver those products right to your door. So very cool model. And very interesting coming out of the COVID period when the courier partners were very much frontline workers delivering food to people because we couldn't leave our homes. I think there was some initial discussion around would that model stay? And I think it's kind of like the work from home model, right? People have gotten accustomed to working from home, being comfortable, and also being able to order products and have them delivered very quickly. And I don't anticipate that is going to go away. I think we've kind of reached a level of status quo where people love it and actually want more of it.
It's a very good term to call it a rocket ship because I can imagine that, you also said and you described Wolt's approach to sustainability as operating without a rigid traditional strategy. And I mean, that's fascinating for one, but on the other side, that's totally normal when things change so frequently. And as you described, I mean, like a growth of people that is so high, I can imagine that a lot of parts are falling off and a lot of things are actually needing to be rebuilt when the rocket ship is actually flying. So can you explain what you mean by that? And like, why is it important to have this approach of not having a rigid traditional strategy in such a fast growing company? Tell us a bit more about what you mean with that term and how you operate at Wolt.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't want people to think that we don't have a strategy because of course that makes it sound like I don't know what I'm doing at all. That's hopefully not the impression I want to give. But I think Peter Drucker said it best that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that is particularly with the types of people who work at startup companies or tech companies, so true. If you don't have a culture that supports the strategy or the vision that you want to achieve, it doesn't matter how great your strategy is because it's just not going to happen. And having worked for big companies and public companies, I mean, we know that we spend lots of money on consultants, they develop strategies for us, and then what happens? They go on the shelf and they collect dust. And I think that at Wolt, how that translates is that having a rigid strategy in the sense that you have a very clear plan and very clear targets around what you want to achieve is hard because the business is constantly evolving and we need to be flexible or agile to respond to those needs. If you look at a bank, for example, maybe that's a good comparison. A bank is a large institution. They're pretty defined in terms of their processes and their setup. Much easier for them to have a rigid strategy because it's unlikely that their business model is going to change very quickly. They need to have targets and goals and defined objectives or processes that will get them to what they want to achieve. At Wolt, it's very much like we build as we go in some ways. So we have what we call a North Star, but from the onset, I think when I first started at Wolt, the first piece of advice the CFO gave me was, Jamie, this is not an organization where you tell people what to do. Very interesting, because when I joined, I initially thought, oh, this is great. We're going to have a bunch of policies and we're going to have a bunch of targets. And this is easy. I've done this a few times before. And when he said that, it was kind of an oh shit moment for me because I realized it was going to be a lot harder than I initially anticipated. But I think at the same time, that has led us to a point where we focus more on building a strong culture of sustainability at Wolt and ensuring that the accountability is there across the organization. And then the targets become more important and the strategies eventually become part of how we work. But I think companies need to reach a level of maturity, both in terms of their, internal processes and of their culture, if you will, before a strategy really becomes super relevant. So in practice, how that works at Wolt is we have 5 key pillars that we look at as more of a framework. The pillars are based on a materiality assessment that we've done, and it outlines the most important topics we need to reach or work on when it comes to sustainability. We do measure our impact, and we do look at where we can drive the most impact. So that plays a role in how we prioritize the projects we work on. But a lot of our work is based on pilots, and it's based on testing and tweaking and learning quickly, failing fast if we do fail, and then eventually looking at how those things can become just a part of how we work. And I think that's where the real magic happens. I also have to say, this is quite important, but working in 30 countries with very different cultural contexts, different languages, like just the complexity of having to translate something into 30 languages makes things so much harder. And it also makes it extremely important for the strategy to be agile, or let's say our approach to working more agile, because I remember one of the conversations we had with our GM in Kazakhstan. Waste, for example, is one of our pillars. We want to minimize our waste across our offices, do more to support our merchant restaurants to reduce food waste. And when we had a conversation with our GM, who's lovely, she said, Jamie, have you ever been to Kazakhstan? And it is one of the places I have actually not been in the world. I said no. And she said, well, we don't recycle in Kazakhstan. Like, people generally don't have an understanding of what recycling is. So taking that as an example, if we were to have very rigid waste targets in every country, it would be almost impossible to achieve those targets in one country without having the infrastructure that needs to be developed at a national level or municipal level for people to actually support it. And I think what that's done is enabled us to look at we can't, maybe recycling is too hard in Kazakhstan right now. There's probably a few things that we can do, and we are doing those things. But then there's other projects that become more important in that region. And it's very different in all of our regions. And I think that's kind of why the value of focusing on the culture building and the accountability is more valuable than focusing, on just having a target program with compliance metrics and driving it that way.
Yeah, I think I can totally echo that. Sustainability ultimately is about changing the culture or building a culture of sustainability, because an organization in the end is just a sum of people, right? And I love that thing about the North Star, because usually people set up rigid strategies and then they try to enforce it down to the people. But actually, when you have a North Star and tell the people, hey, this is where we want to go, this is our ultimate goal. Right now, it's on you to decide on how to actually go there. Especially in tech companies, that can work pretty well because they have the culture to, and also the right people that don't want to be enforced to do stuff, but they want to try and figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
So I think for the tech culture way of doing it, that definitely can work. So in a business like yours, where things move very fast, maybe how do you balance the lack of structure with a need to demonstrate then in the end clear measurable impact, because otherwise you maybe wouldn't even get the budget for your initiatives going forward? And then is it possible to keep things flexible but still ensure accountability?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think data plays a big role here. So, I mean, on the one side, I would say that the flexibility drives a lot of innovation. I think that, I mean, it's not a mystery for your listeners that if we had a really clear path to sustainability and it was easy, then we probably wouldn't need to have sustainability teams. But with the complexity that we have in different countries, being able to give people the freedom to do stuff within reason drives so much innovation. So I think taking it back 2 steps to the North Star, like what do we mean when we say we have a North Star? Our North Star is we want to be able to set a net zero target. That is very much a North Star. We don't necessarily know how we're going to get there, but I mean, it's not rocket science in some ways. We have to look at helping our courier partners to shift their vehicles. And that's another complexity that's important to call out here is Wolt, operating under a gig economy model, does not employ courier partners. Courier partners are free to choose the types of vehicles that they want, and then they can choose their tasks, or they have a lot of autonomy over the types of work that they do. They're independent contractors, and 80% of our carbon emissions actually come from the deliveries that our couriers make every day. So you can see the urgency for me and for the business to try and convert those is quite high, but at the same time, there's a lot of red tape and things that we can't do that don't make sense for us to do, because I think the gig economy model does bring also a lot of innovation and benefits to society. But the North Star is based on key metrics that we have, and it's an area that Wolt has invested quite a lot in this last year, building our data capabilities and competency to be able to measure what actually happens in those markets and what is the impact that it has that gets us closer to our North Star of being able to set a net zero target, but also reducing our emissions per delivery. When it comes to accountability, and I think how do you set that up in an effective way in an organization? We have, I think, coming back to the strategy part, a really solid leadership team that believes in what we're trying to do. I don't know if that's because they're just a little bit younger and more engaged and plugged in, but they really are extremely supportive for the work that we're trying to do. And by measuring the pilots, I think there's also a culture at Bolt where it's okay to fail. Like we shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes because those are often life's greatest teachers. We try as a sustainability team to support those pilots and set them up in a way that we're either going to get we're going to learn something really important, or we're going to see a measurable impact. And what's happened over the last 2 years as we've had these pilots is that we try and anchor them in the teams where they belong, but not always. I mean, surprisingly, good ideas come from everywhere. The teams that implement them, try them. We do support those projects financially from a central budget. And then when we learn stuff, it becomes really easy to then have a menu of options to say, well, we know these 5 things work. We can bake that in and sort of scale them into global programs. So what I love about that is that, the business on the one hand learns how to become more accountable and integrate that into the fabric of how we work and into the right teams that need to own those topics. They get to learn and become more comfortable with the topics and figure out what works best in their regions or their markets. And when we find stuff that really works, it's kind of a no-brainer for us to then just scale them into global programs. So yeah, I think that's a good way to drive accountability.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. I think when you have the right culture, that can definitely work. Is it something that could work outside of fast growing tech driven companies? What do you think?
I think, as I said before, I think that good ideas come from anywhere, can come from anywhere. And there is a role for people to play in the sustainability efforts of any people, consumers, employees, partners, suppliers. So having an element of that in your strategy where there is the flexibility to drive innovation, from a sustainability lens can work in many companies. I think it comes back to whether there's a willingness and a desire to do it that way. And it's a very interesting conversation to have, especially now as like the new regulations are coming out in the EU that are very focused on compliance. Like I think that in many ways, things like CSRD are a landslide for sustainability people. It's forcing companies to become serious and be very transparent about their impacts. But I also think that there's a risk to that, which is that companies are going to lose their ability to innovate because they're so focused on driving compliance with these regulations. And I think that's dangerous because sustainability should be always aligned with the objectives of the business. It should be something that's not on the side, but sometimes it needs to be on the side so that the business gets excited about it. And if you're not able to drive that engagement or excitement at a grassroots level or even at an executive level, then yeah, it won't work. And I think it all comes back to culture.
Yeah, very true. So now that we talked about, let's say, the theoretical level of how you approach sustainability, let's get a bit more actionable and talk about the day-to-day of sustainability at Wolt. What are the key sustainability initiatives you focus on that you believe have the biggest sustainability impact and business growth in the end?
Yeah, love that question. So we like to say that our mission at Volt is, particularly for sustainability, to make cities better places to live. And I love that because when we were trying to develop our approach to sustainability, that was the anchor point for us. Everyone believed that was the role of the organization more broadly, but they didn't really know what that meant. Like, how do you translate that into something that's measurable, that's clear? I mean, we're a delivery platform, right? That's at the end of the day, that's what we do. But how do you make cities actually better? That ended up into defining this thing called our sustainability framework, which is 5 key pillars. As I mentioned before, it's based on the materiality assessment, but the 5 key pillars try to answer the question, how do we actually make cities better? And they are taking action on climate, minimizing our waste, supporting our partners, I should say, to grow and thrive. The people pillar is related to being focusing on diversity and inclusion and supporting our communities. And then the last pillar, which is probably the hardest one for us, but also the most interesting for me personally, is enabling consumers to make better choices, right? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about procurement, right? Which is my background. People are buying things, people are voting with their wallets every day. And if we're really going to try and change things or drive an impact, it all needs to start with consumers. I think one of the most important aspects of our work right now, and which has been for the last couple of years, is our focus on electrification. There's a much more focus from consumers on, can they get zero emission deliveries? Like, they want Volt to take action and do the right thing. And I think with the complexities of our business, if we employed courier partners in a hypothetical situation, it would be a lot easier. We would just give them all electric vehicles. But because we don't, and we don't want to, and they don't want us to hire them, it becomes a much bigger problem that we have to solve. How do you get everyone who wants to work for Volt into an electric vehicle or an electric bike. And that's like a much harder problem to solve because they may only be working on the platform for a couple of hours a week. And we feel fundamentally very strong about not just, I get this question quite a lot. Why don't you give consumers choice? Offer them the option to request a sustainable delivery as Uber has done, for example, and they'll just pay a little bit more. And we feel like as a principle that all deliveries on our platform should be sustainable and that consumers shouldn't have to pay for it because we've all done you know, we've all bought plane tickets. And I think that's a good example of what doesn't work. How many people actually purchase the biofuel option or the offsetting option? People don't do it. And I think that's a risk. Giving consumers that choice may ultimately lead to a point where they choose the wrong thing. And that's actually not the impact that we want to have. So a couple of really cool examples that at a grassroots level that we have done. The first one I would say is something called our EV ads program. And so if you look at the issue at a 60,000 foot level, courier partners want to do the right thing for sustainability. They believe it's important. But when it comes to them switching their vehicles, the biggest challenges that they face are, one, electric vehicles are more expensive. So there's a financial issue. I think part of the complexity with that is that because they're not employees, they don't have an employment record. It's very hard for them to go out and get loans from banks, for example, to purchase an electric vehicle. They're very cost sensitive. They focus a lot on their earnings. And so even though there have been many studies done on the cost benefits of electric vehicles versus traditional gasoline cars, there's still a perception that they're not fit for purpose. They're too expensive. They're not fit for purpose. They're not going to help them earn more. And then I think there's a lot of misconception around electric vehicles related to courier partners feeling that the battery range is not suitable for their work. And I mean, obviously a bike is the best option, but you know, we work in Finland and in Norway where there is a lot of snow. And so there needs to be a more of a fit for purpose aspect to the types of vehicles that they're choosing. Anyways, we do have some courier partners that have electric vehicles, and I think that's fantastic. What we wanted to do was find a way to marry the business objectives of being able to grow our revenues with an incentive of sorts for courier partners that recognizes courier partners who have already made the shift. So the program that we have developed is called EV Ads. And what happens under the program is that courier partners who have an electric vehicle can come to us and have their vehicle branded. We will sell the ad space to our merchant partners, which means that Volt can increase our ad revenues. We can give our merchant partners fantastic data on impressions, on conversions, like things that the advertisers of the world really care about. And the courier partners who are driving the vehicles can actually get a new income stream from being able to advertise. It's kind of like a perfect win scenario where it doesn't cost our consumers more money. Courier partners are recognized financially for driving electric vehicles. And we're able to offer a totally new advertising program to our merchant partners or consumer packaged goods companies that actually drives value for them too. So that's one of the programs that we're really excited about. It's an interesting one because I think we're not necessarily driving direct impact on our footprint. The courier partners already have electric vehicles, but the long-term view is that if you can give them a really sexy incentive, a financial incentive for switching, they will switch because that program is only available if you have an electric vehicle. And that is the thing that we're seeing now is that courier partners are starting to go, oh, I want to do this too. Can we finance an entire shift or transition towards electric cars through advertising? I think that's pretty good.
Super interesting and clever program. So thanks for sharing that. And as I'm also then a big fan of tying sustainability initiatives to business value, are there some specific examples where your sustainability initiatives really are driving business value? I think maybe this EV ads project is one of the things, but is there something else that you could mention?
Absolutely. It's interesting when you talk about business value, it comes in a lot of different forms, right? There's monetary value, there's Retention is a big one for us as well. Courier partners are free to choose if they work for us or other car partners. The delivery platforms, they do often do multi-platforming where they're working for both us and our competitors. And I think there's definitely an opportunity for us to create a great experience for them that makes them want to work with us more. When it comes to electrification, I think one of the things that we talk about, some of the challenges earlier that career partners face when they want to shift, is really the challenge that they have accessing financing for vehicles. And this is it's a systemic issue, actually, much bigger than Bolt. Individual entrepreneurs make money, but because they don't have an employment record, they're not able to get financing. One of the programs that we've started to implement that's actually going to be scaled this year is the Better Cities program. Through a partnership with several other organizations, we're able to offer career partners access to a financial lease on specific types of vehicles. And what we see as more of a social impact program, we're driving change by helping career partners access something that they can't get before, also drives business value because the vehicles can do bigger deliveries. So we notice that career partners are able to bundle more, they're able to actually do more deliveries, they can earn more, but from a logistics standpoint also has a big impact on our ability to drive efficiency. And a lot of that is, I don't think we would have been able to figure out what is the business value if we hadn't tried. And I think that sort of comes back to the cultural part of not being afraid to fail, but being brave enough to try at the same time. And then figuring out, okay, how can we really bolt this on and make great value out of it? The Better Cities program is a good example. And I think if you look at the cultural context that we have in many different countries, we have probably many pilots as well, that where local countries have looked at the problem and said, how am I going to crack it? And come up with solutions that I think are really scalable. So there are incentive programs now also for third-party logistics companies or individual career partners that create a different approach to helping them make the shift, but also work really well and could be scaled at a global level.
How do you ensure that your sustainability efforts are aligned and then effective across all of those countries? And then, of course, also with varied regulation environments. Is there something that you have in place to tackle that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the data piece, I think. Getting data around sustainability programs has always been hard. How do you measure sustainability? It's a hard question. My solution was to hire somebody who's really smart and bring them into the team to help us build really solid dashboards and look at impact metrics. That was a very interesting addition for us to the team. It's a very technical role, very talented person that we have who also works as part of our analytics organization. So this is another example of how we're trying to influence from behind or integrate into the business. A lot of the roles that we have created throughout the last few years in sustainability have actually not been in the sustainability team. Analytics is one of them, where we have a dedicated analyst working on sustainability projects to help us define metrics, and then we can actually show the impact of every pilot that we have, which is really cool because there's hundreds of pilots going on all the time across 30 countries. In the real estate team, we have embedded people working on what does sustainability mean for the office environment, how do we manage our energy consumption, renewable energy purchases, etc. And there's a few others that escape me now, but that I think has been a very good approach, right? Don't grow big sustainability teams because sustainability teams can only do so much. And I think, unfortunately, we're still in an environment where people look at sustainability as something on the side, just culturally. But when it comes from within the teams, that's when you really start to see the teams. And that's what I think drives accountability.
Very true. I think in the end, sustainability needs to be embedded into every company and then also into most of the job descriptions of the people that can really have that accountability to drive it forward. That's the ultimate state. And then the CSO, let's say the head of sustainability, will become that change maker that can influence all of the people and bring forward the culture. True. And having right now a bit of a better understanding of how you approach sustainability at Wolt. I mean, of course, we called it not having a strategy, but right now we can see that you have a lot of great things in place to really scale sustainability also across all of those countries and across all of the employees, as well as partners that you are working with. Let's maybe talk a bit about advantages and disadvantages to that approach.
Sure.
Let's start with advantages. Could you share some examples where this flexible no strategy approach gave you an edge or provided benefits that a more traditional strategy might not have?
We can talk about regulation. I mean, regulation is a good one. I think it's like time and place, right, Max? Like there's a time and a place to talk about all the different things that sustainability includes. Some are higher priority than others, and it really depends on the time and place. If you look at the regulations that are coming right now, being able to measure things like how much waste do we create from our office is important, and we do need to do that. But the amount of effort that would go into that just so that we can be compliant with that one small metric that is probably not a very big impact metric is way less valuable than looking at more of these revolutionary programs that are long term. So one of the biggest challenges I had when I joined Wolt was we had a relatively large office footprint and nobody was buying renewable energy. And we sign leases, but we also grow quite a bit every year. So we move a lot, and we've moved consistently in a lot of our markets to accommodate for the increase in our people base. A traditional approach would have been fix all the offices that we have right now, because that is the North Star vision. But what was really cool was we said, okay, well, we actually know that we're going to move in the next 5 years. So let's focus all of our efforts on building a standard for new offices. And then over time, we'll get there. But we focus our efforts on finding the right offices for the future rather than going back and fixing things. Maybe that doesn't sound so revolutionary, but I think that's a good example of how being flexible and being not necessarily tied to targets and objectives helps us to think outside the box.
Yeah, very good example. What is a disadvantage? Maybe any pitfall that you made that a rigid strategy might have been prevented? Or maybe also, do you see big risks of operating without one?
Absolutely. I think it's tons of disadvantages as well. I mean, it's a lot harder to do this because we have to keep our fingers on lots of different pieces that are all changing and evolving every day in the organization. I think it's also harder sometimes to show a short-term impact because we're focusing on projects that are going to build something for the future rather than going back and fixing everything in the past. But I still think that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. I think it sort of comes back to my initial thinking of when I joined Wolt, I thought, oh, this will be super easy. Like I can do this with my eyes closed. We're going to have a policy and we'll have an environmental management system and everything will be perfect. And then when I realized that was not going to work, I mean, there aren't really a lot of good examples of how to do this without a very rigid strategy. If anything, I think the industry is becoming much more professionalized, particularly with some of the work that you're doing at TSC, which I think is also great, by the way. And that makes it hard because then we lose that innovation. We lose that sort of je ne sais quoi that I think makes sustainability really valuable to companies over the longer term.
Yeah. Looking ahead, what's the biggest challenge you're facing in scaling sustainability right now that you maybe take the next stage of growth and hopefully continue to your journey at Wolt to really grow on the same pace?
Yeah, it's a good question. So many challenges, but I can tell you what we don't have a challenge with, which I think is also reflective of maybe some of the success we've had in building a culture of sustainability. Commitment from the leadership team is still very strong, which I think is awesome. Actually, it's a kind of cool to be a sustainability professional and not feel like you have to sell sustainability all the time because people just believe in it, want to support you. I think support from our CFO has also been really fantastic. He asks the right questions, but he's bold and brave, and that helps us a lot. And I think the other thing that is great about Wolt is that we have a very young workforce and they're all very engaged. So the support that we get from the bottom is really cool. It's very grassroots, and I think that just makes the work a lot more fun. Challenges, interestingly, this has changed a bit. It used to be in the old days of sustainability, that it was really hard to build engagement at the top of the organization. And the middle and bottom layers were super engaged, wanted to do stuff. Now it feels like the top and the bottom are engaged, but it's that middle layer of people who are the no's. And they're the ones they are decision makers, and they are all talented and capable people, but probably haven't had enough time to develop their own vision around where they want to take things, or haven't considered sustainability in their own industry. And that's particularly hard, I think, working at a tech company where we don't like to tell people what to do. We want to hire the best people and then get out of their way, because building engagement either has to happen at the very beginning before they've even started, so that they don't have a choice and have to bake it in, or we spend a lot of time trying to engage that middle layer of leadership to help them get comfortable to try things. And that's interesting because I wonder if there's every business school should have, let's say, some kind of a topic on sustainability that they cover. And you can see that translating into the younger populations who've been through university and become very environmentally engaged, for example. But the people who've already done it and have been in their industry for 10, 15 years, like they're less inclined or less easy to work with, I would say. That's definitely a challenge. And I think it's a big challenge for us. The other one, I think, is something that kind of keeps me up at night, which is with all the regulation, particularly in the EU, happening around sustainability, will sustainability become a pure compliance function? And I think that's like the reporting regulations, for example, CSRD. There's so many good things in there, and driving more transparency really does help us as an industry to move the needle. But people can also get hyper focused on the numbers and hyper focused on being compliant, or essentially like you just get brain damage from looking at all the data metrics that you have to report on. And then there's a lot less enthusiasm or engagement to actually move the needle or drive stuff or try innovative things. And I think that's something where if we do merge more into a compliance function, then sustainability becomes more of a legal industry. It would be a little bit sad.
I agree. Due to all of this regulation, I think sustainability is facing the risk of being seen as a pure cost center. And I think successful sustainability leader will always try to tie sustainability initiatives to revenue securing, if not revenue generating initiatives, and then you will be successful. So that's definitely the task for all of the heads of sustainability out there, to build the business case for sustainability. And that's really where talking to peers, exchanging insights like we are doing at the Sustainability Circle in our invite-only community for sustainability leaders, there you can really get the input, get the tips in order to then also go to your company and implement them. Jamie, we are talking for already 50 minutes, and I think we could go on.
It feels like 5 minutes. But...
Yeah, that's true. I usually promise that we keep it for 30 minutes, but that one here is longer. Maybe one last question. Because like for all of those sustainability leaders working in tech-driven companies, what is the one piece of advice that you could give them to scale sustainability in such an environment?
Never give up being brave to try new things. I think that's probably the best advice I can give anyone is that. But related to that, I would say good ideas come from anywhere, and we can't do everything. So make sure that you're using the people at the bottom of the organization, your suppliers, the top, to really drive change. And I guess this is coming from one of my former bosses, Tyler M., who's the VP of Sustainability at Canadian Tire. He said, there's no silver bullet, so we take a silver shotgun. And I think that has really informed a lot of the way that we work, both at Wolt and in previous organizations, because you just don't know what's going to work until you try.
Perfect last words. Thanks so much, Jamie, for sharing your insights today. As we wrap up, maybe what's next for Wolt in terms of sustainable growth? Is there something?
Yeah, very exciting stuff coming up. We focused a lot on the environmental side. So climate change, I think we're reaching the level where we're getting pretty comfortable with stuff and things are moving. Pilots are making things happen. And it's starting a much bigger discussion at Wolt around how do we really make this go 100 miles an hour. But one of the areas that we have probably not spent as much time on as I would have liked is the social side of sustainability. And that's something that we'll be working on quite heavily this year. And I'm very excited about that. We actually just posted a new role in our team to help us figure that piece out. So that's probably the most exciting thing that's coming on the sustainability front.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for everybody who's listening in and who wants to connect with Jamie. Just go on LinkedIn, check out also maybe the position that they have posted. Jamie, thank you so much for your time. And to everybody who is tuning in,
Pleasure,
see
man.
you next time at the Sustainability Leaders Show. Bye-bye.